to hell in a very short period of time. So I am not making a prediction on specifically how it will go down. There are just too many paths forward. Sometimes it is overnight. Sometimes it's over a year. Sometimes it's over a generation. Demographics gives us a hard stop of 10 years. So it's between now and then on some sort of time frame. Politically speaking, this is practically a blink in an eye. Demographically speaking as well. But let's talk about that finance model. Because that kind of puts to pain the entire idea that the Chinese are good planners. They're really not. The whole idea of the Asian financial model is that capital, cash, whatever it happens to be, is a good of the state. It exists to serve political purposes, not economic ones. So in the United States, if you take out a loan, you have to show a business plan, you have to offer collateral, and if you don't follow your plan or if you don't pay back your loan, you lose your collateral. This is what we consider normal. That is not how it works in China. In China, you have to show your employment plan. And if you can guarantee a large number of people will be working at a job, regardless of what that job does, you get money, because it's all about preventing large groups of workers from going on long walks together. Development from an American point of view is about building infrastructure, building productive capacity, serving a market, growing the business. In China, it's about achieving strategic goals, making sure that the population doesn't rebel, making sure they can dominate specific industries, not on efficiency or on cost, but simply because of mass output. So they put a lot of cash into industrial plant, not to produce anything in particular, just to produce a lot of stuff. And this is one of the many ways that the Chinese ended up going from being a backwards country to producing more steel and more cement than the rest of the world combined. As recently as 7 years ago. And then they just have to dump it on the international market because there's not even a capacity in China to absorb it all. That's incidentally one of the reasons why One Belt, One Road is out there. It's a product disposal program. Yeah, product disposal program. There we go. Yeah. Too many words too early in the morning. Moving forward, you can apply this to every sector of the Chinese system. And in the sectors where the Chinese are not as productive, they have to put more and more cash behind it, and it's more and more wasteful. So the overall sector that is most exposed to this sort of financing is agriculture. Chinese land writ large is only about 1/5 the productivity of the global average. So they have to put in scads more, in case of some fertilizers, 5 and 6 times as much to get the same amount of calories out. It's particularly bad with infrastructure. We are now in the early stages of the Chinese following the Japanese program of building roads to places where no one lives. And of course, we've all heard about the ghost cities. These are not the plans of a country that is planning 30, 40, 50 years down the line. These are the operations of a country that has one goal: make sure there's not an internal rebellion. Now, separate from the book, separate from the long-term situation, we've had a government collapse in China over the last year. Xi is now...
事实一再证明
It has been proven time and again that sanctions are a boomerang and a double-edged sword to politicize, instrumentalize, and weaponize the global economy, and to willfully impose sanctions by taking advantage of one's dominant status in the international financial and monetary systems will only end up hurting one's own interests as well as those of others, and inflict suffering on people around the world.
And so we even got Apple, like the quintessential American company that has outsourced its entire supply chain. Every time there's been a writing on the wall that there's a genocide or there's a crackdown in Hong Kong or there's inefficiency or labor costs are going, every single time that something has come up, Apple has doubled down on China. So now 92%, I believe, of their supply chain is internal to China. And even they started looking last month at other options for the first time. Lockdowns are their only option to avoid millions of deaths. I mean, look at Omicron B. I mean, we've kind of forgotten about this in the United States. We've stopped caring about it back in January. But Omicron B is the most communicable pathogen we've ever had. And Omicron B is the most lethal of the COVID variants to date. Now, everyone in the United States either has the vaccine or natural antibodies or both. China has neither of those. So if they open up, they're just absolutely screwed. But you're seeing some version of this going on elsewhere with security issues, with energy issues, with food issues. And so those supply chains that we thought were inviolable no longer are. But most importantly, and we haven't gotten to this stage yet, we're used to trade physical transport on the water being safe and cheap. And that's just not the case anymore. We had the Europeans stepped up to the plate with their oil embargo for Russian crude this week. And the most important part of that is they're banning all insurance for all vessels that carry Russian product. That's the start of the unraveling of what makes transport globally.
Активизируются контакты российских деловых кругов.
Contacts between Russian business circles and the business community of the BRICS countries are being activated. For example, negotiations are underway to open Indian supermarket chains in Russia, to increase the share of Chinese cars, equipment, and machinery in our market. In turn, the Russian presence in the countries of the Five is expanding. The volumes of Russian oil deliveries to China and India are growing noticeably. Cooperation in the field of agriculture is developing dynamically. Russia exports significant volumes of fertilizers to the BRICS countries. Russian IT companies are expanding their activities in India and South Africa, and our satellites are already providing TV broadcasts to 40 million people in Brazil.
It's kind of a fun thing because the last 20 years is all in the post-Cold War system. So the first big wave of globalization was mostly among the allies during the Cold War. When the Cold War ended, most of the rest of the world came along. And so the last 20, 30 years, that has been the fastest period of growth in trade and in standards of living and in GDP in human history. It's been fantastic, but it was always artificial. So what we now have to do is that in reverse, and then some of the Cold War expansion in reverse. So we're in a world right now where there are a large number of secondary powers, whether it's China or Russia or the EU, and they're just not going to survive this transition. China is going to be the biggest splash when it goes down. The Russians will probably be the loudest, all things considered, with the war. The Europeans, there's a number of ways that can break down. Not all of them are completely horrific, but most of them are going to see a significant breakdown in Europe's ability to trade. So we're going to go from kind of a step above first amongst equals where we are now to North America, South America, and then everybody else pretty far below. Everything that we use in the world is transported across international borders, but that's not true for everyone. So in the case of North America, for example, we do the majority of our non-electronics manufacturing within North America. That is reshoring at an incredible rate. We are already the world's largest producer of crude oil and natural gas, and we are actually significant exporters of that as well as refined product. And we are the world's largest agricultural producer and the world's largest agricultural exporter. So there are definitely hiccups along the road. I mean, if you can't just dissolve the world in a day and expect us to not notice. We will. It will be awkward. But 5 years, 10 years from now, once this transition is passed, we'll have supply chains that are close to home that involve Mexico, Canada, and ourselves. We'll have a transport system that is largely internal, and the United States will be in a better place with stronger growth and lower inflation than any other place in the world. But we have to get there first. You don't do that overnight. Let me put my personal cards on the table so you know where I'm coming from. I'm a bit of a globalist. I'm an Atlanticist. I see the rapid expansion of things like NAFTA and NATO to other countries as the most reliable way of ensuring American security and wealth for the long term. But people who believe my way have lost all 7 of the last presidential elections. So again, not an aberration, it's a trend. Isolation in the American system comes and goes more than it does with most countries, because for the United States, since we've broadly secured what we need here in North America, we always have the option of looking out and we always have the option of looking in. And so when we do see something that's an opportunity or a threat across the ocean, we will rise to the occasion and we will deal with it. Maybe not on a time frame that a lot of other countries would like, but we do. What was unique about the post-World War II environment was that for the first time in dealing with that threat, we found ourselves occupying territory because so many countries had fallen, and we felt the need that we had to make sure that Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany did not resuscitate themselves in a short period of time like Imperial Germany, not into Nazi Germany. That required boots on the ground, and that required something that we usually don't have in foreign policy in this country, a plan. And that plan was globalization, and it lasted for 70 years. It is the longest term bipartisan foreign policy we have ever had. but it achieved its goal 30 years ago. And so there was always going to be a need for, if not a withdrawal or a rejiggering, a redefinition. And the president who tried to get America to have that conversation with itself, what sort of world do we want to leave for the next generation? That was George Herbert Walker Bush, and we punished him for it. Mm-hmm. And so, this is, we're a democracy. This is ultimately on us. Yeah. But then we elected a series of people who have decided that it was time to loosen the ties that bind between us and the rest of the world. And since globalization ultimately was a bribe, you let us write your security policies. In exchange, you can sell into our market and access anything else. That's a subsidy. And when you carry out a subsidy for 30 years, but you don't get the strategic benefit, people get annoyed. And so we got Obama and we got Trump, and now we have Biden. And if you look at what, say, Biden is doing with the Russians right now, part of me is thrilled that we're finally leading a coalition again. But you'll notice there's nothing economic about it. This is a fair weather friends coalition when we all have the same strategic goal. There is no guns for butter trade this time around.